Hi, everybody. How you doing? It's Marc Ross. We're back. The Ructions. We've been gone for a month. We've seen a king's coronation. We saw a phantom chase with our friend Meghan Markle. And we've seen a presidential launch. And we're back with the Ructions. Gerald, how you doing, buddy? What's happening?
I'm very well. It's May in England and sunshine has broken out. Whether that will last for more than 3 or 4 days, who knows? But we've got some decent weather at last. You mentioned the King's coronation. I'm afraid the King had rather a wet day for his parade a couple of weeks ago, but that's hardly unexpected in London. Pretty much any time of year, you can't legislate on that. As you say, quite a few things going on, quite a few non-things going on. As you mentioned, the non-car chase in New York. I would love to be able to drive around Manhattan unimpeded for 2 hours. I mean, that must be some sort of world record. And yes, poor old Ron DeSantis, who I was just about getting to know who he was. I'm wondering why I bothered, really. Is it all over for Ron already?
Well, we'll close out with Ron because we cannot not talk about Ron DeSantis. But let's start out with talking about something getting a lot of hype, a lot of buzz. It's going to solve all the problems in the world, or maybe create more problems in the world. We're talking about artificial intelligence, AI. Oh my God! Can I just say, like, I don't get it. Like, I'm bored. Like, I don't get it. What is happening? What are your thoughts on AI? What is happening?
I think I'm in the same camp as you. We mustn't be unduly cynical. There's been a phenomenal bit of marketing hype around Chat GPT, which sort of emerged last autumn, didn't it? November, December time, and then all sorts of commentators of the great and the good said, this is it. This is it is the next big thing. And it's not just the next big thing. Lots of hyperbole came out. People saying it's the biggest thing since the transistor, and all sorts of.
The Gutenberg Press. It's bigger than I think Larry Summers, former U.S. Treasury Secretary, Harvard president, called it bigger than the wheel.
Yeah, right. Well, if we're looking for a sell signal, I think that's quite a good one. Where are we with AI? I'm always nervous about it because I'm nervous that what people call AI probably isn't. And the roots of all of this goes back to optimization of past data and very cleverly optimizing it. And then we could say a step forward is so-called machine learning. I vaguely read an article on machine learning probably 30 years ago. This is all kind of standard stuff. What has changed, of course, is our old friend computing power and the sheer amount of data that we've collected and we're able to crunch. And there are obvious advantages to this. I mean, the one that's often cited is the work that's been done on cracking the human genome, just the sheer grunt work of doing that. And also,
let's talk about the genome. But go ahead. I mean,
well, also allied to that is the ability in medical diagnostics. So instead of your doctor or physician peering at your X-ray to decide, what's happened to your knee, you now can scan this through some form of machine learning that will compare it to 10 million other examples and then rank it in terms of whether it's got a problem or not. And there's no doubt that those models and those techniques are pretty superior to even the best professional physicians, who at the end of the day are only human. They're tired some days, they don't spot things on other days, and all the rest of it. And the unblinking machine may be very good at that. Now, that seems a very, very long way from the key thing, which is intelligence, in my view, which is creativity. Where's the creativity in Chat GPT? The fact that you can take an article out of the New York Times and get Chat GPT to turn it into Shakespearean sonnets is both kind of clever and equally stupid. It's clever in what it does. It doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't know anything. It's not a living system. And we're seeing, I think, a lot of hyperbole around, well, machines are going to take over the world. There's somebody, the ex-head of Google, saying he's worried that machines are going to start killing people. Well, people have been managing that quite successfully for the last 5, 10,000 years. And actually, you might say, for all of this talk of AI and robots and all the rest of it, where the hell are they? Because the only sign of robots I see on the battlefield are in things like mine clearance or bomb disposal. They're not really up there in terms of aggressive weaponry. I know we've all seen the clips, fascinating clips from Boston Dynamics of these robots that sort of tumble about and do somersaults and everything. But
Right.
are they really going to take over the battlefield? Hostage to fortune here, I will say I don't think so.
Yeah, I think you're spot. I mean, for me, I think if you know anything about probability, statistics, if you understand anything, even the basic stuff about computer storage, I mean, just the brute force, the amount of knowledge. I mean, if you and me could just spend all the time in the world and just absorbing all the information in the world, presumably we would be smarter. We could answer more stuff, but it's all probabilistic, right? I mean, essentially what
Yeah.
AI is doing at this stage, it's mathematics. It's creating like probability that if you ask for this, most likely you're going to get this answer. So I think stepping back around the hype around this is going to be interesting to watch out. I mean, I just remember like just months ago, Web3, crypto, all this crazy stuff, that was the solution that bombed out. I could see within the next, quarters, CEOs, other folks just saying, hey, we have AI, and just the amount of money and the amount of bets are going to be placed on this
Yeah,
are
I
just
mean
going to be foolishly lost.
it's a marketing term, a bit like blockchain, or
Right.
if you're in the agricultural business, of course, everything is artisan or fresh from a farm and all the rest of it.
Farm to fork. Farm to fork is my
That's
favorite
the one.
phrase.
If you want an analogy with what's going on, think of something like gold mining. Now, in gold mining, you kind of hunt around, and eventually, whatever techniques are used, which are beyond me, people dig a mine and hopefully find gold. And sometimes they do find gold. And that is an original creative process. Now, when they chuck all the spoil out and the tailings, or whatever one likes to call it, at the end, there's still quite a lot of gold left over. And in fact, a number of companies now make a very, very good living and business out of remining the spoiled material,
Yeah, 100%.
the past data. And they use new techniques. They don't use shovels and spades, they use chemicals. Now, I think there's an analogy here with what's going on with creativity versus machine learning. And I say machine learning because I'm not convinced we're at AI yet. Who knows where we go? But it seems to me that a lot of it is about going over the past and finding stuff that we were unable to find the first time around, basically.
Yeah, and I do. The analysis around the, you're getting your scans, getting your X-rays checked, getting any kind of medical records. I mean, I do. I'm not trying to just. This is all powerful and interesting, but I think if you step
Sure,
back and look at
sure.
it, it's not as dynamic. But at the same time, this week, Sam Altman was meeting with your favorite elected official. He was in Paris meeting with Macron. He's testifying on Capitol Hill recently. I think it's
Yeah,
also interesting for me from a geopolitical, comms perspective. I was thinking about this. Radio was invented in 1901, right? And then a generation later, the Massive Communications Act of 1934, which kind of still dictating, how we communicate here in the States, was passed. So I do think, just from I don't know what the right word, from a risk management or what people should be thinking about, is that governments are going to certainly regulate technology and the internet writ large, much more so than they did 20, 30 years ago. I mean, those days of the Wild West, I think, are over.
yeah,
Well, I think what's nervous about this stuff is that you have if you regulate it, especially if the big guys come in and say, these are the rules we want, the Microsofts, the giant tech companies, if they're behind the rules, does that shut out other innovation, other smaller players? And I think that's something to be mindful of. And,
sure.
if you have the guy at Google saying, oh, I'm terrified of this stuff, so let me regulate it. Let me tell you the rules. I don't know. You got to watch that stuff. When the big guys tell you they want the rules written, you got to watch that.
I would agree entirely with that. I mean, I think if you're looking for a game changer, it's going to come, if it ever comes, with quantum computing, because
I'm with you
quantum
100%.
computing,
That seems fantastic.
that would open up genuinely new vistas, rather than what at the end of the day I think are really rather clever party tricks. In terms of market hype, we've seen an extraordinary rise in Nvidia's share price a couple of days ago now. 25.
Unbelievable! It's almost $1 trillion company now, just like overnight.
It's an exceptionally good company, and it's an exceptionally well managed and financed and good business model and all the rest of it, and mainly based off the fact their chips have made huge ground in things such as gaming and all the related things that come off it. And then a chance remark by an executive who's got an axe to grind, because I'm sure he's got some share options, says AI, and the stock goes mad. I think that's just another bit of stock market nonsense, which we may remember in our review of the year, but we won't remember it for any other reason. And the stock market is desperate for something new and novel, but it always is, and so we get that reaction.
So when it comes to AI, what are you looking, like, how are you trying to separate out the noise? Like, what are you really looking for? What are the totem?
Well, my as a complete amateur or whatever the opposite of an expert is, somebody who's you guys would say a complete rookie in this area. I tend to follow a lady called Professor Melanie Mitchell, and she is she wouldn't describe herself as this, but I think she is the queen of academic understanding of AI. She's at Santa Fe Institute down in New Mexico, and I would encourage people to look at their website. It's very easy for the non-scientists to understand what's going on. They do a series of online free lectures, courses on AI, complexity theory, adaptive systems, all this stuff. And I think I don't wish to misquote her here, but I'm pretty certain that her view is that what we are calling AI just isn't. That doesn't mean it won't come, but this rather clever, as you put it, number crunching and machine learning is where we are. This isn't a new form of genuine creative intelligence, and if it happens, it may be too late for us to even realize it's happened. But it's not there at the moment.
Now, I do like that. Yeah, the creativity, the ability to create something going from 0 to 1. I think Steve Jobs talked about that a lot. Like
ChatGPT can create all sorts of images on the basis of past artists, but it's not an artist itself. It's not going to come up with anything original. It'll come up with something that is an amalgam of Picasso and David Hockney or something, that sort of feels different, but it's not a genuinely creative new step.
Yeah, like if I gave you, the royal you, like if I gave someone the blueprints to Disneyland, could you create Disney? Probably not, because there's more to it than just the X's and the O's, the ones and the zeros. It's also creating this nebulous creativity. So I'm with you. I think academics, linguistics, and embracing it, but being skeptical, listen, like what is really happening here?
I can see some jobs being under threat from where we are. So translation, for example, translating of documents, translation business is going to be in trouble, because it will be just incredibly easy to feed in something in Polish and for it to come out in Japanese. And so some of those sort of intermediate, really quite high skill jobs for humans, those sort of things I think could be under threat.
Well, fortunately for us, podcasting influencers will never go away. So I think we'll be good for another 20 years, right?
Well, I think lunch is still safe. That's the main thing.
Power lunches will still happen. All right. Speaking of power lunches and how we're going to pay for it, let's talk about central bank digital currency, right?
CBDC. Yeah, that trips off the tongue, doesn't it?
I know.
CBDC.
How many bureaucrats name this to?
I think in the I don't know if this is right, but I think in America they may be going to try and call it the digital dollar. the British government, in its infinite wisdom, has come up with the term Britcoin. Now, what is this? Well, it's essentially a payment system that replicates the currency. And as they proudly announce, and the Bank of England are very keen on all of this, which kind of makes me nervous, it gets rid of the third-party intermediary. So I don't need to bank with somebody to be able to make a payment from my account to your account, and you don't
Right.
need to bank with somebody. We can somehow move the money, I guess, via an electronic wallet or whatever the phrase will be. This is all wonderful, but it could be the law of unintended consequences here. What happens to the banking system? I know it's very keen. You know, we're all very keen to say, let's get rid of banks.
You're worried about Jamie Dimon.
No. Here you go again. No, I'm worried about what if there are no banks, because who's going to decide on lending? Are we going to have a government lending base or not? Where's that going to come from?
I see. I mean, isn't it just the idea though? I mean, certainly. I mean, cash is hard to move. It's like physically a pain in the butt to move.
Hey, but you've got digital dollars at the moment. I mean, I know maybe in the US, it's always tended to be a little bit slow on payment systems, but you know, in the UK, people now are habitually buying a bar of chocolate in a shop with a debit card and not using change. You know,
and that costs.
People always talk about notes, but I think it's coins that are disappearing really quite quickly. I mean, you try and
go ahead.
I was going to say, you try and park a car in the UK now without either a smartphone or a debit card, and you're going to have a problem because it's all gone electronic. So all that electronic stuff is there. Now, if you are if you're more prone to conspiracy theories and to worry about big government, this currency could be programmable. The Britcoin could be programmable. So whoever's controlling it, the Bank of England or British government or whoever, could say, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Ashley, you can't spend money on putting petrol in your car. You should have an electric car. Now, that's a very, very extreme example.
But currency has always been controlled by governments. I think a positive, though, is to look at it if the government needs to get cash into the system. Say there's a natural disaster, a pandemic, tax returns, you know, the ability to just drop currency into somebody's account. I think there's something powerful about that, because just reducing the friction.
Well, yes and no. I can see. Yeah, I would. Yes and no. I can see the positive of that. The negative is that you are now at the behest of that particular currency. You know, how free are you able to spend this stuff? The Bank of England are making a big point about it not going to be programmable. Well, hang on a moment. The first things governments will be tempted to do is have it programmable for one obvious reason, which is to cut down on the black economy and tax evasion. I mean, how long would it take before the great and the good gather around some big table in Washington or Geneva or London and say, what we need is a global standard about how things should be paid for? Now,
yeah, I can't see. I mean, certainly the Chinese are not ever going to give up control. The communists are never going to give up control of the currency. So I don't know. I'm more worried about AI taking over than central bankers. I mean, you spend more time around central bankers. I'm sure there's a dream of a global currency, but I don't know. Reducing friction. The other thing I think that these guys they have the problem of is that other folks are creating currency, right? So you don't want to be in competition, so you always have to be ahead of the game, so to speak. So you know, the central bank of the U.S. and the UK need to get in this space.
I suspect what will happen is it would get launched in the UK, and they are quite serious about it. Probably as a sort of parallel payment system, and I don't see the need to close my account at my bank and just run everything in Bitcoins.
I would imagine we'd still have banking because there's other services, you know, obviously loans, other activities. I can't see.
Well, I'm just fearful that it may be a lot of unintended consequences and the temptation for the temptation for governments to control payments through it will be overwhelming after a while. In fact, you'll start to get demands for it. You'll start saying, well, we've got to clamp down on these, people who are not paying their taxes, or the black market and all this type of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see.
No, I agree. I mean, there are like in China, in Beijing, they've got this thing called the social score, right? Where they give you it's not even just credit. It's like the way, are you a good communist? Are you a good citizen? It's an interesting thing about, if you use this digital currency to buy a Big Mac, right? Will the government say, hey, Mark, we've noticed you've eaten 15 donuts this week. How about some kale? That's an interesting observation.
Now that may be a bit dystopian. It may be, some people say, oh, that's a bit far fetched. But you can see bureaucracy's temptation. I mean, we've seen in the UK, where we fondly believe that we live in a very free society, how the British government very rapidly took control of many areas of life when the COVID pandemic started. They didn't hesitate to bring in all sorts of very draconian regulations. And, most people either believed with it or acquiesced with it. And I think it's just, you have to be careful with these sort of technologies, because, that they can be a little bit big brotherish. That said, it's going to be run by the British government, so it'll be, donkey's years late, won't work properly, and perhaps we shouldn't worry about it.
Do you see, let me get a prediction out of you. I mean, do you see this becoming a campaign issue, say, in the next UK general election? I mean, could you see Rishi Sunak talking about this? Yes or no? And do you think, who's going to go first? Like, is it going to be somebody from the global south, like Brazil? Is it going to be like a smaller country like Singapore? Somebody's going to go first and say, this is the greatest thing since Swiss cheese.
Very interesting. The first thing to say is Rishi Sunak is wildly enthusiastic about it, but he would be, given his slightly nerdish sort of quant background.
Right.
Is it a campaign issue? Good grief, no. I mean, trying to explain this to the great British public, you'd have about as much luck as talking about quantum physics. So that is just not going to happen. You make an interesting point. Could it be somebody like Singapore that would go for it? And, let's upset the Singaporean government now and say that in some ways they're a benign dictatorship. They're extremely benign, but they're also very prescribed in their rules and regulations, and they don't hesitate to fine people and all the rest of it. And again, in a smallish community, in a sort of almost like a sandbox test area, maybe those guys will be the ones to watch for. Easier to get it rolled out there than in somewhere like the US or France or the UK.
And I think, our friends down in El Salvador, they tried to launch the, the massive Bitcoin experiment, which, completely imploded. Not to say El Salvador is not a great place, but if you had a more, for lack of a better word, serious country, more respected country like Singapore go first, maybe that is the step.
Yeah, you've got to be careful here we don't commingle two things here, which is in many ways what a lot of was going on in El Salvador, and other people also advocate, was a form of electronic gold standard. That, our current currency is a kind of not doing well, is being devalued, is going to hell in a handbasket. Why don't we somehow link ourselves to something that can be fixed and will keep us on the straight and narrow? And I think that was one of the thoughts behind Bitcoin. Of course, the whole thing was barking mad from day one.
Well, I think, but before we close out this topic, I think the idea, though, something to be mindful of, is just the velocity of money. Like what's happened, the velocity of money is like you put money into the system, it moves. So right now, I live in Alexandria, Virginia. If I buy a book via Amazon, it goes all the way to Seattle, right? It doesn't help my community. Whereas if I walk 4 blocks, go to the Old Town bookstore, that the velocity of money stays internally within the community.
Good point.
There's something to be said about, I think, governments trying to find ways to stimulate the economy quicker than tax cuts, interest rates. The digital currency seems tempting, especially if you're a bureaucrat who thinks they can tinker with the economy. But I
Well,
can see this idea of velocity of money gaining some
I think for
currency. No
bureaucrats,
pun intended.
it could be wonderful. How, we've already got lunatics in this country trying to bring in so-called 15-minute cities. This is the idea that you shouldn't be driving more than 15 minutes away from home. I haven't understood any of this nonsense.
No, Gerald, you're missing it. You should be able to walk 15 minutes to handle all your life. You don't drive in a 15-minute city.
Well, I mean, Oxford is going to be an interesting city to watch because they're basically making it impossible to drive around Oxford in the car. And I can confidently predict that this will cause nothing but chaos and economic decline. But you could imagine with digital currencies, perhaps you should only be able to spend your money within so many miles of where you live. Again, I think this is sort of, in the fictional realms of films and things. But the fact that if it becomes a programmable currency, the greenback in your pocket is not programmable. You can bribe me with as many dollars as you would like to, but the government can stop you doing that with a digital dollar.
Well, you could see too, like it could get really exciting. You have dynamic real-time pricing, like this avocado can change, like your dry cleaning, your movie ticket, like it's very exciting. Actually, I had $12 in my pocket this week, and I didn't know I didn't know where the hell I was going to spend it. So I was like, I can't use this anywhere. Like everywhere I shop now is like digital only, right? That's a good point. So I was like, I have nowhere to tip. I'm not going to a gentleman's club. I have no way to get rid of this currency. So the only thing I could think of was I had to go to the grocery store, and I was like, can I pay with cash and digital? And the guy was like, yeah. So I was like, I felt relieved that I got this cash out of my pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I take your point, and of course, digital payments and everything are fantastic, but at the moment they're neutral, and it's whether they stay neutral in the future. But we shall see.
Hopefully, machine learning will sort this out. All right. Speaking of the future, Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida, announced for president this week. I'm fascinated by this because I've been involved in I've probably done like 1,000 political events of different sizes, everything from a launch to massive campaign rallies to like small, meet and greets and diners. I've done stuff all over the U.S., UK. I mean, I've seen tons of horror shows like putting on events. I think what we witnessed on Wednesday night was unprecedented, unruly, unexpected, unbelievable. My first inkling that we're going to have a problem was David Sachs. I don't know if you follow David Sachs. He's part of the PayPal mafia.
Mm-hmm.
Anything he touches, I called him the Cuyahoga River fire of politics. I mean, just like the idea that somebody in Team DeSantis land approved this, thought this was a good idea, is unbelievable. I'm just curious how it's playing across the world. What's happening in London? Do we know more about DeSantis? Are we more excited?
No,
Does
we
it matter?
He did come and speak at a London tech conference, and he got a tiny bit of coverage on the BBC, I think. And he's kind of talked up by some parts of the British press as the man that isn't Donald Trump. But there again, it's the T word. We're saying, you can't say DeSantis without saying Trump. And that's kind of the problem, as far as I can see. And, we talked about before how Trump has just sucked all the oxygen out of the Republican Party and all the rest of it.
He's an apex predator, man. I mean, the guy cannot be stopped, won't be stopped, doesn't care. I mean, he's
anyhow. Well, without turning over to him, trying to talk about Mr. DeSantis, I don't know. He's got no visibility over here. In fairness to him, US candidates don't until we're down to really the actual race. Maybe occasionally in the summer before the main election, there's still one or two hanging around. And he's not a novelty. He's not from an ethnic minority or he's got no novelty factor. In fact, his novelty factor is how straight down the line he is. But I think it's true to say, and I've only watched a little bit about him, or watched him, is he's crashingly dull. And you can be many things in America, I believe, but being dull is not the way to fame and fortune, is it?
Especially if you're running for president. I'm curious, what's your thoughts about the human behavior deciding to launch such an important, the most probably the one of the this is probably the most important thing
I
he's
kind
done
of
up to
get
this
it.
point.
I kind of get
And
it because,
using, do you respect the idea of going with Twitter Spaces? Like, I
well,
mean,
I kind of get it because he's of an age, as I am, where you start to worry that you're out of touch with things, and everybody tells you is Twitter's where it's at. And we know it's not the metaverse because that's disappeared before it's even really appeared, as far as I can see. But anyhow, there is a school of thought that says if you want to, hit the sort of,
actually, Gerald, do you know how old DeSantis is?
he's going to be younger than I think he is, isn't he? I'm going to say he's late 50s. Here we
He's
go.
44. He's 44 years old.
Good grief! I thought he might be older than me, but then I have a slightly
But he comes across as an older person. Anyways, yeah. I mean,
yeah, no,
carry
older.
on, but
Good grief, absolutely. Well, therein lies another huge problem because he's hardly down with the kids. So we're talking about a man who was born what, late 70s, early 1980s, then.
yeah,
And
80s for sure.
so he would have been in college in the 90s and the turn of the century and all the rest of it. Crikey, he sounds a lot older than that. But my point, which is now you just shot out of the water, was that you get to an age where you're worried that you're not keeping up, and people sort of whisper in your ear and say, this is the technology you should go for. And politicians have done it in the past. First time they used radio, first time they used television, and paid advertising and all the rest of it. And so, in a way, I get it, but it's probably too soon, and he's the wrong person to have that. He hasn't got the chutzpah to carry something like that off, I don't think.
Yeah,
If
I'm so fascinated by I'm just so fascinated by the decision making process, and the president, the PM, they're caricatures, right? I mean, like
Yeah,
Hollywood has a perception, and to go out of that mold, it's very risky. I mean, it's like a high risk. If you went through the scenario, yeah, sure, this could work, but the downside is just so monumental. Um,
well, it's like
Elon Musk with the rocket ships, the failure to launch. I mean, there's so many memes now. It's just,
sure,
it's
it's
interesting.
like,
The psychology of it, I find fascinating.
to me, it's a bit like the old Groucho Marx joke, right? Which is, yes, sincerity. Once you can fake that, you've got it made. And it's very true. It's all very well to try and fake things on television or in getting out in front of the public, let alone meeting them and shaking hands and all the rest of it. But I think you get rumbled. I think if you're not yourself, and you've said this before, just the grunt work of long campaigns, you start to unravel. He may have already unraveled to the extent that will the focus now turn on to another Republican? There must be a camp that's the anybody but Trump camp, and maybe there'll be a focus to a different Republican, but we shall see, I suppose.
Wild times. Well, speaking of faking sincerity, I don't know if that's a good segue. What are we reading and watching?
What are we reading and watching? I'm
Do you
now
want to
going
go
to do.
first?
I'm now going to do an advertisement for which I've not been paid, but I do know the author, and he rather unwisely has mentioned me in the acknowledgement. So this is not an unbiased review, but it is a very good book. It's by my good friend Christian Hunt. It's called Humanizing Rules, and it's, as he says here, it's bringing behavioural science to ethics and compliance. Now, Christian is a sort of top man in understanding human behavior sort of through the prism of whether we act ethically, whether companies act ethically, and actually whether that can lead to more efficiency and profits and all the rest of it. It's an exceptionally easy read. It's not one of these turgid academic jobs. It's packed full of full of real life examples from businesses and individuals. And when he very kindly gave me the book the other week, so there's the bribe. He increased the bribe by giving me these, which is a pair of Pizza scissors. Now, these are very solid German engineering. I don't know if
Wow.
you can, we
Yeah.
are talking serious stuff.
Why the hell would you need scissors for pizza?
Well, there you go. So you're going to have to buy the book now because, in fact, he talks about it's the concept of finding the right tools for the job. And he makes the point that, those sort of little sharp wheels that people cut pizzas up with are not anywhere
That's what we
near.
use. Yeah, it's
Man,
a proper tool.
now you're in the Stone Age there, Mark. You've got to
Okay.
get modern now. And a little description of what they do and why they're curved in the way they do. But he's just making the point that if you don't have the very best kit and equipment at the start, you're at a disadvantage. But as I say, it's called Humanizing Rules. There's a plug again. I can recommend it. So there we are. In terms of viewing, well, this rather bizarre bit of viewing today. I'll send you a link so you can put in the notes. It's only 12 minutes long. It's a YouTube clip, and it's from an American academic called Russell Aikoff, who's no longer with us. He died, I think, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. He was one of the early pioneers of so-called systems learning or systems analysis in the idea that you look at an overall group of things as a single system. And that one of the big mistakes we make in life and in business is to try and break things up into smaller parts, solve all those individual parts, then hopefully we'll make the whole better. And he pretty much describes in 12 minutes why that won't work and indeed why it can't work. And to me, it rang an enormous number of bells in terms of watching how people try to make their businesses more efficient by tinkering at bits of the system, and it doesn't work. And of course, it seems to be very much in vogue, certainly over here in the UK, the complete inability of the British government to see anything as a whole. Everything is divided down into small little chunks with endless grandstanding announcements by ministers who come and go. And as a result, very little seems to actually change or get done or improved. So he's a name that's worth remembering, Russell Aikoff. He's written a number of books, or he had written a number of books, but just a quick 12-minute intro to looking at systems is very good.
Perfect. I look forward to seeing that. I'm reading The New Map by Daniel Yergin. Yergin's written a lot of books about energy, oil. This is his latest book. It's more about minerals and mining. The subtitle is Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations. I'm sure the publisher was like, listen, man, there needs to be a clash.
I like the sound of this. I read his first book on the oil industry, that must be 20 or 30 years ago, and it's an absolute classic.
Yeah, it's absolutely classic. This is not as it's a pretty, I think you'll be able to read this in, a good sitting. But it's got some good stuff in there. I think one of the key points is just, we've chatted about this before, just the amount of minerals that people claim they want to clean up the world or modernize the world. But it takes you a good 20 to possibly 30 years to get a mine online once you've done all the due diligence, research, regulations, etc. And, if you want to be clean by 2050, which is 20 years away, we're already behind the curve. But it's an interesting book, another good book to read. Show I'm watching Drops of God, which is it was based on a Japanese comic book. But the premise of this show, it's on Apple TV. It's shot in French, Japanese, and English. The premise of the show is two people are battling for the world's greatest collection of wine. It's part of an inheritance. And it's very descriptive. If you're into wine, it's absolutely fantastic. If you're into Japanese culture, it's fantastic. Very well shot around the world. Cool story, and combines art, culture, wine, all that good stuff. But it's called Drops of God. Good stuff. So we've been enjoying that.
That sounds very good. Sounds very good indeed.
Which is cool. Yeah, it's interesting now, the amount of I just love these, French, Japanese, English show. It's fantastic. What a time to be alive. Globalization. It's great. All right, Gerald. Thanks a lot, buddy. I want to say hi to our friends in Italia. They still haven't called. They're probably on holiday now. We're coming up to the summer season. They're probably on their way to.
I just say we've missed them. We've missed them now until September, probably. But,
unbelievable. Unbelievable. We need a better agent. All right.
Okay, son.
We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Okay, take care. Bye-bye.
For more what? Nonsense and silliness. Ciao.